Blackhawks practice today wasn't as intense as it's been over the last week. However, it might have been the most significant day yet. I'll get into all the key takeaways from practice at Fifth Third Arena.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm Jack Bushman. Have to let you all know real quick that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Go and download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and get $300 worth of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, segment one here today. The Blackhawks were back at practice following their first day off since training camp started 1 week ago. And I think it was a much needed day off for both the players and also for the media as well that have been going through the grind over the last week. Also allowed me to get fully back and healthy and down at practice here today, which felt really great. Per usual, two separate groups hit the ice for practice at Fifth Third Arena this morning, as you know, there's still 49 guys on the training camp roster. However, for the first time since training camp started, I think there was some pretty clear significance behind who skated in which group, as it sure looked like Group 2 was filled with the AHLers, while Group 1 was the guys who are likely going to be part of the NHL club. So definitely wanted to dive through all the players that were in both groups here today, as well as Jeff Blashill's comments on the groups after practice. Starting out with Group 1, aka the quote-unquote NHLers right now, there were 24 players that practiced in Group 1 here today. First, starting with the forwards, there were 14 of them. Ryan Donato, Oliver Moore, Jason Dickinson, Nick Foligno, Ryan Green, Sam Lafferty, Andre Burakovsky, Colton Dach, Tyler Bertuzzi, Lucas Reichel, Teuvo Teravainen, Frank Nazar, Ilya Mikheyev, and Connor Bedard. I don't think there's any real surprises there. Oliver Moore, Ryan Green, and Colton Dach are the three youngsters of the forward group who are battling for NHL roster spots right now. Defensively, there were 8 defensemen who skated with Group 1 here today. It was Connor Murphy, Sam Renzel, Wyatt Kaiser, Louis Crevier, Matt Grzelcyk, Artem Levshinov, and then Alex Vlasic. And the goaltenders, that's the most obvious and clear position group of the three: Spencer Knight, Arvid Soderblom. Now that we finally got an update on Laurent Brossoit 1 week ago, we know that's going to be the Blackhawks goaltenders to open up the regular season. But as far as the lines and pairings that Blashill rolled with here in Group 1, serving as the Blackhawks top line was Ryan Donato, Connor Bedard, and Andre Burakovsky. When they've had, those three together in the same practice session, that's how Blashill has used the top line thus far. I imagine those three will probably get an opportunity to play with each other during one of the 2 Blackhawks preseason games over the weekend here. And then on the second line, pretty straightforward as well, as they've been throughout camp. The one forward line that was actually the same in the scrimmage that the Blackhawks went through on Monday. It's Teuvo Teravainen, Frank Nazar, and Tyler Bertuzzi. That trio has stuck together all throughout camp thus far. Similarly to Bedard, Donato, and Burakovsky, I imagine that trio will get trotted out there this weekend in one of those 2 preseason games. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is how Blashill sorts through the top 6 to open up the regular season. I know obviously there's still 12 days before the Blackhawks head on down to Florida for their season opener, but I think it's pretty clear who's, going to be the top 6 for the Blackhawks. Maybe there's a change between the first and second lines, but I'm just expecting this is probably what it's going to look like when the Hawks open up the regular season. Down on the third line in Group 1 was Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, and Ilya Mikheyev. I don't think there's any surprise there as a gritty checking third line for Jeff Blashill. And then down on the fourth line was Colton Dach, Ryan Green, and Sam Lafferty, while Oliver Moore and Lucas Limbo Reichel is kind of what I've nicknamed him now. They were serving as the 2 extras kind of on the outside looking in of the 4 forward lines. And to kind of break that down, I've mentioned several times in the last couple of weeks, because of Colton Dach's size, his physicality, his power forward type of mold, I really do expect him to wind up on this NHL roster and probably will be in the Blackhawks lineup come October 7th against the Panthers. Ryan Green obviously getting a real good opportunity to center the fourth line in between Doc and Lafferty. Honestly, I kind of thought Oliver Moore had the leg up over the two based on what we saw at the Tom Curver's prospect showcase, as well as what we've seen through camp so far. And in addition to the preseason opener, I was a little bit surprised to see that Green was in that 4C spot while Oliver Moore was serving as one of the two extra forwards. Not that it, cements that Ryan Green is going to be on the NHL roster and Oliver Moore isn't. There's still a lot for them to be battling for over these next 12 days, but I just would have kind of envisioned that it was going to be the other way around. As far as Lukas Reichel being utilized as an extra, considering he had a pretty lackluster preseason opener while skating on the top line with Connor Bedard, was a ghost for the majority of that contest. It's not surprising whatsoever to see Reichel on the outside looking in. And obviously there have been trade rumors around him for the majority of the summer. They kind of picked back up again a few weeks ago. I don't know if the Blackhawks are going to be shopping him. I still do think it would be a little foolish to sell low on Reichel, but at the same point in time, if they're going to be utilizing him as an extra, it's pretty clear that there's not really a future for him here in Chicago. So maybe a change of scenery move is on the horizon, even though it might not be the most logistically savvy thing for the Blackhawks to do, to like punt on Reichel for a third round pick or something along those lines. But not surprising to see him on the outside looking in. On the forward lines here today. He's going to have to do something noteworthy in the preseason in order to change that. And then defensively for the Blackhawks as well, Alex Vlasic and Sam Rinzel, think this is notable, Hawks fans. They were back united as the top pairing for the Blackhawks today. Well, Ethan Del Mastro, who has been skating with Rinzel for most of camp thus far, they were paired with one another for the preseason opener on Tuesday. He has been bumped back down to the third pairing along with Connor Murphy. And this top three defensive pairings for the Blackhawks: Vlasic, Rinzel, Kaiser, Levshinov, Del Mastro, Murphy. That was the defensive unit that I projected in my way too early defensive pairings projections episode that I dropped about a month ago. And I just think it's pretty natural for all three of these pairings to be with one another, right? Alex Vlasic, sturdy, rangy defensive defenseman who sneakily moves pretty well for a guy of his size, right? And I really think has developed his offensive game nicely over the last couple of years, but he's the defensive stalwart up there, while Sam Rinzel can be the speedy, offensive-minded defenseman on the top pairing. I just think that's a real natural pairing for those two guys. Wyatt Kaiser and Artem Levshinov, they remained with each other despite, some defensive struggles in that preseason game against the Red Wings. Artem Levshinov in particular. Honestly, I didn't think Levshinov had a very good practice today either. And I think that's also significant considering the situation that Matt Grzelcyk is in. He was skating with the NHL group here today, down on that extra pairing along with Louis Crevier. And of course, Grzelcyk is on a PTO with the Blackhawks right now. Blashill mentioned that if some of the young guys struggle during camp and the preseason, then he could be given an NHL contract. And, well, both Ethan Del Mastro and Artem Levshinov struggled pretty mightily in that first preseason contest. So I do think if that continues, there's a legitimate chance that Matt Grzelcyk gets an NHL contract. I know a lot of Blackhawks fans thought it was just kind of a strong arm move to get Wyatt Kaiser to sign that deal. I do think that was part of it. But as I've kind of mentioned time and time again, I do think there's a legitimate chance. I was even saying this prior to Tuesday's preseason game. I think there is a legitimate chance that Matt Grzelcyk winds up getting an NHL contract, especially if Ethan Del Mastro and Artem Levshinov don't kind of shape up their games in these final 5 preseason contests. Fully expect Matt Grzelcyk to get an opportunity in at least one of the 2 games here this weekend, not only to show off what he could do with the Blackhawks blue line, but also an opportunity for him to showcase his stuff for other NHL clubs who could potentially be interested in giving Grzelcyk a contract. So definitely think he's going to be in the lineup for the Blackhawks for at least one of these games here this weekend. One thing I did want to mention here, Blackhawks fans, Landon Slager was unavailable for practice here this morning as he's dealing with a little bit of an injury. I mentioned that there were 24 players who skated as part of Group 1. Landon Slager Blashill has been pretty open about how he wants to give Slaggert an opportunity to play along with Jason Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev on that third line. So whenever Slaggert gets healthy, I expect that he's going to be practicing with this NHL group as well. That makes 25 total players as part of this quote-unquote NHL group, and of course, only 23 can be on the roster when October 7th rolls around against the Florida Panthers. So that means at least two of these guys, in addition to Landon Slaggert, two of those 25 players are going to be AHL bound at some point, and it's likely going to come from the group of Colton Dach, Ryan Green, Oliver Moore. I think Landon Slaggert's probably going to be part of the NHL group. Same with Colton Dach, but I still included them here. And then Ethan Del Mastro, Artem Levshinov, and Matt Grzelcyk on the back end. I think Wyatt Kaiser is pretty likely. He's going to be opening up with the NHLers. Del Mastro and Levshinov, I think, are the two youngsters with the most to prove here throughout the rest of training camp and the preseason. And then, as I just mentioned, Matt Grzelcyk, he's going to be getting an opportunity this weekend. We'll see how he winds up looking and how that is going to impact the rest of the Blackhawks blue line over these next couple of weeks. But there is my breakdown on the quote-unquote NHL group today at practice. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, I'll dive into all the players who skated with Group 2. But first, I do got to show some love to one of today's sponsors, which is FanDuel. The NFL season is now in full swing. We're 3 weeks into the season, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready with a can't-miss offer, because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and win $300 worth of bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. And what I personally love about FanDuel is that it's super quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. And with player props, same game parlays, and more ways than ever to get in on the action, are you ready to play? All you got to do is download the FanDuel app now or go and visit FanDuel.com in order to get started. And again, that's FanDuel.com, and you place your first $5 bet, and you'll get $300 worth of bonus bets when it wins. Before I get into segment 2, just a quick reminder to please go and smash that like button down below and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Segment 2 here on today's show, though, Group 2, the quote-unquote AHLers, were actually the first ones to hit the ice at Fifth Third Arena for practice this morning, and they were led by Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allan, and Nick Lardis. None of the three I don't think is surprising to see as a part of this group, as I've, talked a couple of different times how I expect each of them to begin the season down in the AHL with Rockford, but I'm sure it's, still a little bit disappointing, especially for, Korchinski and Nolan Allan, two former first-round picks of the Blackhawks who have both been on the professional scene for the last 2 years. But like I said, considering the depth that the Blackhawks have defensively, Blashill kind of put it as we have more good players than we do spots available. And I do think that's true. Korchinski and Allan both probably are capable of being NHLers at this point in time, but the Blackhawks are just prioritizing a couple of guys ahead of them who are a little bit older and more experienced, whereas Korchinski and Allan could still benefit from developing it down in the AHL. As far as the rest of the players who are skating with Group 2 early on Thursday morning, the forwards, Dominic Toninato, Jackson Cates, Martin Mishiak, Aiden Thompson, Paul Ludwinski, and Gavin Hayes, in addition to Nick Lardis, of course. I don't think there's any real surprises there. I would say Aiden Thompson of this group is the one who probably looked the best throughout the Tom Curver's Prospect Showcase, as well as in that preseason opener, made a nice pass to pick up a primary assist on Wyatt Kaiser's goal. And I think altogether just the speed that Thompson plays with, as well as the two-way ability, he's a complete forward out there. And that's a reason why, even though he is a little bit older than the rest of the guys I've put into my Blackhawks prospect rankings, I've had him consistently part of my top 20 because I do think Aiden Thompson, I remember watching him for the first time at Blackhawks development camp after they drafted him in the third round of 2022. And again, I knew he was older than a lot of the guys who were there, but I was like, this guy, he just gets it. He recognizes plays at a high speed, makes those savvy, quick passes. I'm super excited to see how Aiden Thompson is going to fare in his first full AHL season with the Rockford Ice Hogs. Already performed pretty well for them in the Calder Cup playoffs as well. Defensively for the Ice Hogs, in addition to Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allan, Kevin Fitzgerald, Ashton Coombe, who's going to be getting sent back to juniors at some point with the Seattle Thunderbirds. Tage Harding is entering his first full professional season. He also, like Aiden Thompson, jumped onto the AHL scene at the end of last year once his final year of college hockey wrapped up. Ryan Mast, who scored a goal at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. Ice Hogs gave him an AHL deal over the summer. Andrew Perrott, he was the one who, he's on an AHL deal as well, replaced Ty Henry as part of the Blackhawks training camp roster after Henry unfortunately suffered a knee injury and is going to have to undergo surgery. And then last but certainly not least on the blue line, Dmitry Kuzmin, who might have been the worst blue liner for the Blackhawks at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. In net, pretty clear cut like it is with the NHLers. Stanislav Bereznoy, who is excellent in his first appearance with the Blackhawks. Drew Comesso is going to be the starter, the number one in between the pipes. And then Mitchell Weeks is the fifth goaltender on the Blackhawks training camp roster. Maybe we'll get a spot starter too every now and then with the Ice Hogs. But again, like I said, I don't think there's really any true surprises as far as the guys who skated with Group 2 here today. However, I do want to point out, well, I think it's pretty clear these guys are where they are for a reason. Blashill did mention after practice that some guys who skated with Group 2 here today, I'd imagine that is Korchinski, Allan, Lardis, maybe someone like Aiden Thompson or maybe Dominic Toninato, who could be utilized as an extra forward on the NHL roster. He did say some of those guys are going to be joining Group 1 maybe tomorrow or even getting some opportunities with the NHL guys during the preseason. So even though, again, like I said, it's pretty clear, I think there is some obvious significance behind these two groups. Roster when the regular season opens up, well, they still have to go and prove it over these next 12 days in order to fully crack that NHL lineup. But at the same point in time, it's still pretty clear where the coaching staff and the front office kind of envision most of these guys starting the regular season. So there is everything of note from practice down at Fifth Arena here this morning. Felt real good to be back down there, finally fully healthy. I was very appreciative of that off day yesterday. I'm sure, as some of you could tell, I have a lot more energy. I'm sounding and feeling a lot better here on today's show. So 2 thumbs up from yours truly. But coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap up today's episode, do still want to get into some quick injury updates. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can easily find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, when speaking with the media after practice, not only did Blashill talk about, the groups and also some thoughts from the preseason opener on Tuesday, but he also provided an update on a couple of injured players. First and foremost, the most serious one, Joey Anderson, who did not participate in practice here today. I imagine if he was healthy, probably would have been part of that AHL group along with Dominic Toninato. I feel like they're both kind of in a similar spot as veterans, but are likely to open up the year in the AHL. However, Joey Anderson is going to be out for the remainder of the preseason as he has to undergo a procedure for a chronic issue. Blashill didn't really get into more than that and didn't really have a timeline on Anderson's return. Wasn't able to say if he's going to miss regular season time or not, but did mention that he's going to be out for the remainder of the preseason. So a little bit of a tough blow there for Joey Anderson. Again, he was always most likely to begin the season in the AHL, but maybe if, he had a couple of strong performances, could have cracked that NHL roster possibly as an extra. Doesn't look like that's going to be the case any longer, though. Then Landon Slaggert, who I mentioned in segment 1, when he does get healthy, fully expect him to be part of that NHL group. Well, he, Samuel Savoie, and Brett Seney, all 3 of them actually skated on their own, well, I guess as a group of 3, ahead of the practice sessions here today, but did not participate with Group 1 or Group 2. That is going to be the same thing that happens tomorrow. They're going to skate ahead of practice, but they're not going to be participating in it once again, and they're all three going to be out for both preseason games here this weekend, which definitely sucks for a guy like Landon Slaggert, who feels like Jeff Blashill really wanted to see what he had in store on that third line with Ilya Mikheyev and Jason Dickinson. And then last but certainly not least, AJ Spellisy, who is one of the few junior players still left on the training camp roster. He is going to be sent back to the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL, as the 19-year-old rule is not going to be coming into effect this season. He would have been a good candidate for it if it did, but is going to be going back to join with the Spitfires, who are expected to be one of the top teams in the entire in the Ontario Hockey League this season, excuse me. But I do imagine that, well, first and foremost, the good news is that Blashill told us that Spellisy should be back for practice here tomorrow. And if that is the case, fully expect him to get in for at least one preseason game, just for the Blackhawks to kind of see where he's at against some bigger bodies and against grown men and better competition compared to the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase, before then ultimately sending him back to the Windsor Spitfires. So promising update on AJ Spellisy. A little bit of a tough one for Joey Anderson. Hopefully we'll see Landon Slaggert, Samuel Savoie, and Brett Seney be able to take part in preseason action here sooner rather than later. But that's going to take care, of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you haven't done so already, and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. That way, when you're driving to work, when you're on your lunch break, whatever it may be, you can get all of the latest episodes. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and check me out at Jack Bushman2 on X. I'm also doing a lot of Blackhawks writing now for Chicago Hockey Now. Could not be more excited to get down to the United Center next week for the Blackhawks' first preseason home game. But check me out on X at Jack Bushman2, and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey to get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursdays. I'll see you next time. Why do I have a problem with pressing that button? If you've been watching the last 3 or 4 episodes all the way into the end, first and foremost, let me say thank you very much. You are true Locked On Blackhawks diehards. But if you have been sticking with me all the way to the end, then I have a problem with pressing when I should be pressing this button. I apologize to all of you for my lack of quality production skills, but until the next episode, I hope I gave you all a good laugh at the end. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.